It has been 20 years since The World According to Garp put author John Irving on the top of the bestseller list. Since then, he has written such critically acclaimed books as A Cider House, Rules, and A Prayer for Owen Meany. In his latest novel, A Widow for 1 Year, he revisits the theme of loss and grief and love in what many critics are calling his best since Garp. I am pleased to have him here. Welcome to the broadcast. Tell me about this, since it's a novel and some people here have not read it yet.
Well, long before I thought of writing again about a writer, yes. which the last time I did, I said, I'll never do that again. So many friends, when I was writing The World According to Garp, said, what's your book about? And I'd say, well, it's a writer. And they'd look upon me with the greatest pity.
Yeah, you know, I mean, we've done that, John.
Poor fool. He's writing about a writer. So I had a little more confidence this time that it might not turn out too badly. But long before this character was a writer, she was first and foremost a woman, and I wanted to choose deliberately three views in a woman's life: her childhood, when her mother leaves her, when she's a woman in her late 30s, unmarried, with a personal life who's not nearly as successful as her personal career, and then when she's a widow and has a child the same age she was when her mother left. Those junctures in her life seemed to me to define a kind of crisis period in her life, and the book grew up around those three acts, like a play.
Was it personal that you wanted to write about a woman?
No, the nature of the things that bother her, her sense of guilt and self-deprecation for having a sexual past, that made her to me a woman. Men are permitted to have sexual pasts, provided we don't egregiously repeat them.
Yeah, or act with some element of discretion or whatever.
Yes, but a woman is judged not only more harshly by society, but she judges herself more harshly for sexual misjudgments in the past. And so from that focus, a woman who grows up without a mother and with a father who's a terrible womanizer and who herself is sexually angry, sexually insecure, all kinds of things pointed to her being a woman. I've had strong major, minor women characters in novels before, but this novel began with a main character who was a woman, and her mother, the woman who disappears for 37 years, is, if not the main character of the book, certainly I think its main emotional force.
Where did the idea come from?
You know, a novel doesn't begin so much with an idea for me as it begins with a sense of person and a sense of what happens to the person. The overall idea of a book it comes later. You
begin with a character?
I begin with a character. And in this case, I began with a last line. I often begin with a last line. Or I don't begin writing a book, perhaps for sometimes 6, sometimes 18 months, until I've seen enough of the story so that I know what the ending is. I get to the ending first, and then I work my way back to where I might want to begin. Let
me understand that. You start with a character, and in your mind or through some activity with a pen or in a typewriter, you begin to write things, or you just think it out until you, in your head, have this character going through something that ends up in the last chapter.
The outcome is very important. I mean, the sentence that became the last chapter in The World According to Garp, where all terminal cases, was one of the first sentences I wrote down. And for a while, it was the first sentence of one chapter, and then it was the last sentence of another chapter, until finally I thought, no, that's the end of the book. And when I had the end of the story, I could work my way back. In this case, I thought of a mother who doesn't see her daughter for 37 years. When she walks into her daughter's house, her daughter bursts into tears, and the mother says, don't cry, honey. It's just Eddie and me. And it took me another 6 months to know how I wanted to echo that line at the beginning of the story. In other words, I wanted a line as close as possible to the beginning of the novel that was a reflection of what she would say at the end.
And what's the writer's work in between those 2 points? I mean, is it, for you, how does the story unfold? What characters come in to affect this character? What is it that goes on for you in your case?
Well, in my case, it's almost a grocery list. It's a list of details. I mean, Auden used to say that before there could be a poem, there had to be some act of noticing. You had to observe something.
Yeah.
And I spend maybe as much as a year just taking notes about who the characters are, where in the story their paths are going to cross, for what periods of time in the story they're not going to see each other again, where the gaps are, where the junctions are. I mean, you have to know those things, or I do. People sometimes think it's strange that I follow this 19th century model of a plot-driven novel. But I don't know how to tell a story. I wouldn't know how to begin a story if I didn't already know what happened at the end. No more than I think most of us would walk into a dinner party with some of our best friends and say, an amazing thing happened to me today at the airport, if you didn't know what happened. Yeah. I mean, I can't wing those things. I have to know what I'm going to say before I start to say it. And the process of anything for me has slowed down to the extent that I now spend a longer and longer period of time taking notes before I commit myself to a first sentence. I don't want to write that first sentence until I feel I have not just the outline of the book, but even the tone of voice already in my mind.
Is it harder for you knowing what to say or knowing how to say it?
Well, they're not exactly synonymous, but synona. Let me try that again. They're not exactly, they don't always go together. Exactly. It's one of those words like tangerine that I had trouble with as a child. I used to say the thing like an orange. I think that the events of a book, the vital episodes, the crucial incidents, the areas where the story pivot, I have to know those things first. And then how to say it is a matter of what degree of grief, what degree of something uplifting, what degree of sadness there is at the end. That's why I don't think you can find a tone of voice to tell a story until you know how it feels when the story is over. There's always a sense for me of an epilogue, of an aftermath, of how does the end of the story affect you. And if you don't know how it affects you, then I don't think you know what tone of voice to start to tell that story in.
But the brilliance of use of the language is just there, yes? I mean,
well, it's there.
That's what a writer's craft is about.
I think,
in part.
In part, I feel that the strength of my language is largely the result of my capacity for revision.
Really?
I write terrible first drafts.
You do?
The first
you
sentence.
You mean they're bland, they're mundane, they're...
No, the first sentence out of my mouth is as difficult as trying to say synonymous. I mean, it's always a clumsy thing.
Irving confesses here.
No. I mean, I think it's a part of my memory of being a student, which was hard work for me, and something I was never very successful at. That I took it as a given that nothing would ever be right the first time. That if something were to get good, it would only become so out of rewriting, out of revision. And so I think that when I'm pleased with the language of my stories, it's only because that language is worked on. You make yourself sound the same. You don't always sound the same.
But isn't that probably true with Faulkner and Hemingway and Fitzgerald and so many?
There are many writers who are more talented than I am and who sort of get there. With a little more ease. There are some writers who are notorious at not revising or not needing to revise very much or not caring enough to revise very much.
Good writers?
I think so. I don't see a great deal of evidence that Faulkner was a big rewriter.
Yeah, but Hemingway said he edited at least everything he'd ever written at least 30 times.
Well, he came from a newspaper background where that was the expected way you worked. I've looked at Dickens's manuscripts, and I'm amazed at how busy they are. I'm amazed at
what went into making the final product.
Yes. I love it. It gives me some measure of confidence that it's okay to sort of make carrots and arrows and write on the back of the page and change the color of ink and all of that. I still write in longhand.
Why?
I just love it. I mean, I love
it. It's tactile and everything.
It is tactile. It's like, I think, someone who's a graphics artist who likes to draw. I mean, I just like having a pen in my hand. If I look at a page of typescript and it's clean, I think, well, somebody hasn't written
Well,
it.
have you tried writing it with a word processor at all, with a computer?
I spent one summer. A company was kind enough, or perhaps they were
IBM?
entrepreneurial enough, to give me a computer for one summer when I was doing nothing but writing book reviews. I was in between books and I was writing some reviews. And I found it a very useful tool for writing letters and for writing things in short form that you needed to revise quickly. But that's the antithesis of how I spend my life. I don't need to revise quickly. I need to be as slow as I can be. And I don't want something in my life as a novelist that speeds up the process of revision. I think the process of revision should be as slow as you can make it.
The character of Marion has what kind of beauty are we talking about here?
I don't want to put her character to the face of a movie star or something.
I know, because that sounds.
I don't see her.
But it's stunning.
It's stunning. It's something that's arresting, and that it makes her someone you look at with a sense of her whole life, as her young admirer says, even when she's in her 70s. I suppose what you said at the beginning, that it's a book about grief, it's a book about loss. To me, her dead children are the most present characters, although we never meet them when they're alive, are the most present characters in the first part of this novel. And Marion's absence from the story, when she leaves her daughter at the age of 4, and she's gone for 37 years, her absence to me defines the sense of loss that is the book. So that even though she's a character who's on page for less than a third of the novel, to me she's her strength of presence is really what makes everything happen. It's because of what happened to her children and because of what happens to her daughter when Marion takes herself out of her daughter's life that the whole story exists in the first place. And so in a way, although she's a minor character, she's major as a force. And I just feel it was best to describe her as, at the age of 39, she first strikes this 16-year-old boy who falls in love with her and who is in love with her when she's 76 years old at the end of the book.
A Widow for 1 Year is about grief and loss and all the things we've been talking about. Yet every novel you've ever written, you have characterized as a comic novel.
I say in this book somewhere, I think maybe Ruth says it about herself, but I've said it elsewhere about myself, that I think there are many things you can decide to be as a novelist. I think you can decide to be more or less autobiographical. You can certainly always decide to be historical or contemporary. You can decide to write a book in the third-person voice or the first-person voice. You can decide who the characters are. But I don't think you have any control over the degree of comedy that there is in your voice, the degree of sarcasm, the degree of facetiousness, the degree to which something comic undermines even the most serious moments of the story. I think it just comes out that way. I can't plan to be funny. I'm terrible at telling jokes. I can't think of something funny I'm going to say ahead of time.
But it is embedded in your language.
It is. It's a part of the language. I mean, and it's no surprise to me that the writers I most admire today, Garcia Marquez, Günter Grass, Salman Rushdie.
Not an American among them.
Robertson Davies, who's a Canadian who died just recently.
Yeah.
They're all 19th century storytellers. They all write plotted novels, and they're all comic. You know, an exception to that, who was a great hero of mine as a reader, was Graham Greene. I don't think, for example, that Robertson Davies could write a book that wasn't comic to save his life. I don't think Graham Greene really knew how to be funny. You are the way it comes out, you know, and that's a part of your voice that you can't choose. You can't choose that.
Why do you think you're a writer?
Well, my earliest indication of wanting to be a writer was actually not out of being a reader, which I was, but out of a persistent desire to spend a lot of time by myself. I had friends. I wasn't unpopular. I wasn't antisocial as a kid, but I couldn't wait to get home and just go to my room and be by myself. So long before, I mean, if you don't want to spend a lot of time.
Thank God you found writing.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't, that's true. I mean, there's a lot of things you can do to
have you in a
really embarrass
straitjacket by
yourself.
now. Yeah, right.
No.
Yeah.
So.
And I mean, when did you know you had talent?
Oh, I always doubted it. I mean,
You did always doubt it, didn't you?
To some degree.
There is about.
I knew I could accomplish something, but it seemed to me that the accomplishment was always going to be 7/8 discipline and 1/8 ability on my part.
7/8 discipline and 1/8 ability.
I had a wrestling coach who characterized me that way, and it did me a great service. Actually, he said, frankly, you're not a very good athlete, but if you work hard, you'll be able to meet with a measure of success.
The interesting thing about that, John, is that so many people that come to this table, who are the best at what they do, regardless whether it's writing or playing a sport or politics or medicine, they all feel that way. 99% of them think that the difference that enabled them to achieve whatever it is was perspiration, was dedication, was discipline, not because they were smarter, more gifted. Occasionally, an athlete will come in and say, "I had nothing to do with my hand-eye coordination. It's not something I earned."
We've all seen those athletes,
Yeah.
and to us mortals, they certainly seem godlike. They always have.
But
to me.
most of the people in other areas don't say it's because I had a bigger brain, smarter, wiser, whatever.
I think they're right.
because-
I mean, I think that the test of any accomplishment is how self-critical you can be. If you can't be self-critical, you may do something that's pretty good, but you'll never be able to make it any better. If you're not able to sort of attack your first effort and break it down and sort of and build it up.
Have you been running against yourself since GARP, in a way?
No, not at all. I mean, I think that's an understandable assumption when you go from a position of being, as I was, a relatively unknown writer to being a very well-known one. And when the book comes sort of mid-career, GARP was my 4th novel.
Right.
This is my 9th. But in fact, because I love to write long books, because I love to spend a lot of time writing a book, I like to work slowly. GARP changed my life only in very positive ways. Quite frankly, there's a huge difference between being able to write 8 hours a day, 7 days a week, and having to have another day job. And for the writing of my first 4 books, GARP included, I had to have that other day job. I taught English, I coached wrestling. I had these things that I always thought I would do by necessity to support myself. I never thought my writing would be self-supporting. And so when it was, when suddenly at 36, I was supporting myself at what I most wanted to do, it was a luxury for me to be able to do it all day and not have to give my time over to something else. And I've always, I wake up with that feeling that I'm lucky to be able to write all day because it's all I ever wanted to do. And it's easy with hindsight to be grateful for years that were difficult. I certainly wasn't grateful for those years when they were being difficult. But I think with hindsight now, it's safe to say I benefited from those 4 novels which were written not under adverse circumstances, but simply in 2 and 2.5 hour snatches in a day, which was about all I could give over to writing a book. And I used to say to myself, if I could do this all day, I might get somewhere. I mean, ask a doctor to have a medical practice and until 10 o'clock in the morning. Ask a lawyer to be a lawyer and have 2 clients a week. If you want to do something, you got to do it all the time.
It's like walking up the hill with a lot of extra weight on your back.
Yeah.
John Irving, A Widow for 1 Year. What's the cover? Tell me the significance of this cover. Anything? I know you don't design covers, but...
Well, actually, I came as close as I ever have to designing this one. The illustrator, who's a wonderful illustrator named Hani Werner, has done 5 of my jackets, and of this one I'm most pleased. When the mother leaves her philandering husband and her 4-year-old daughter behind, she takes with her all the photographs of her dead children and leaves the hooks stuck in the wall. And Ruth believes that to a certain extent, the daughter, that the reason she becomes a writer is because of those picture hooks, that she has to imagine to recreate her brothers, whom she only saw in their photographs, because the mother has taken the actual pictures away. And so the picture hook is not only remindful of that loss, of the death of those children, which kind of underlies the story of the book, but it's also symbolic of everything the main character has to imagine from what isn't there.
Again, John Irving, a widow for 1 year, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Pleasure to see you again. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time.